Under the cover of dawn on July 22, 2025, a single Ukrainian Su-27 Flanker sat silently on a remote forward airstrip just kilometers from the Dnipro River. Its camouflage paint was peeling, the airframe patched in places with hastily welded panels. But none of that mattered, because inside its weapons bay sat a device that had never before been fired in combat, a Ukrainian-designed, domestically upgraded standoff missile with a 300-kilometer range built specifically for one purpose: to strike the Russian 132nd Airborne Command Base deep inside occupied territory. The target wasn't just strategic, it was symbolic. Home to the airborne unit that led the initial invasion of Ukraine in 2022, this base had since become a nerve center for Russian operations in eastern Ukraine. Taking it out would send a thunderclap through Moscow's command structure. But the plan was almost suicidal. At exactly 04:30 a.m., the pilot, call sign Cricket, taxied onto the cracked tarmac, his cockpit lit only by the dim glow of converted analog instruments and a jury-rig tablet feeding him live satellite targeting data from NATO intelligence assets. There was no AWACS support, no drone escort, just him, the missile, and a plan stitched together in a bunker outside Kharkiv over black coffee and sheer willpower. As the Su-27 screamed into the sky, hugging the terrain like a hawk on the hunt, Cricket adjusted his oxygen mask and throttled down to just under supersonic. Russian radar would start searching soon. He had 24 minutes to reach the launch zone, 90 seconds to fire, and maybe 2 minutes after that to survive. Below him, wheat fields blurred into dark rivers, then into dense forests. Russian radar coverage in this region was formidable. S-400s, Panzers, and Buk systems stretched across a deadly curtain, but they were optimized for cruise missiles, drones, and large-scale air raids, not a lone, low-flying fighter. Cricket's flight profile was aggressive and unpredictable, jinking left and right, popping up only briefly to verify coordinates. His path was carved through a corridor of uncertainty designed to be narrow enough to be missed but wide enough to be plausible. At 04:52, he reached the initial point. His radar warning receiver came to life instantly. 3 Russian search radars had just lit him up. He was now a red dot on every screen from Belgorod to Rostov. But that was the plan. As Russia's air defense operators scrambled to figure out what they were seeing, Cricket pulled the nose up and launched the new missile, codenamed Volya, meaning freedom. It dropped cleanly, engine cold, flying purely on glide and stealth for the first 60 seconds. Only then did its solid fuel motor ignite, launching the weapon forward at Mach 1.5 toward the Russian base. Cricket rolled hard and dove for the tree line, dumping chaff and flares, punching out flaps to bleed speed as his jet was now visible to every system in the sector. A barrage of launch-alets screamed into his headset. 3 48 N6 missiles were airborne, racing after him. But he was already gone. His Su-27 disappearing below the radar horizon just 20 seconds after firing, skating along the edge of physics at 60 meters above the ground. The missiles never even came close. But it wasn't over. Now the warhead was inbound. The Volya missile, less than 2 meters in length but packed with more than 200 kilograms of high explosive and a classified terminal guidance system, was now flying its own war. Using terrain mapping software borrowed from agricultural drones and a warhead sensor suite cobbled together from decommissioned Soviet cruise missiles, it dropped to 10 meters and raced through the early morning fog like a ghost. No warning, no radar lock, no time. Inside the Russian 132nd Airborne Command Base, Major General Mikhail Orlov was preparing for a 0500 briefing. His staff was scattered across various wings of the compound, housed in a brutalist concrete structure originally built to resist NATO bombing in the 1980s. It had never been hit. It was considered unbreakable. On 04:59, the Volya missile came over the last treetop, dropped its nose, and drove itself directly through the Eastern Conference Room. The explosion was instant, the shockwave powerful enough to collapse half the command structure in under 2 seconds. A secondary fireball erupted as a field depot caught, sending flames 100 feet into the sky and detonating several ammunition containers meant for frontline resupply. The blast was heard as far as Kursk. Russian emergency response units were paralyzed. Initial reports labeled it as a gas explosion. That lie lasted less than 10 minutes. Satellite images, leaked and circulating online by 05:15, showed the obliterated command structure and the scorched crater left behind. The death toll was immediately uncertain, but among the confirmed dead, Major General Orlov, 3 senior communications officers, and the logistics commander for Russia's Eastern Front. The building was designed to withstand everything but precision, and now precision had arrived. In Moscow, the news caused chaos. Kremlin press agents went silent, defense officials canceled scheduled briefings. The FSB reportedly initiated an internal probe into how the attack got through, while Ukraine's Air Force issued a single cryptic statement: targets that fuel aggression are no longer safe. Across Telegram, Russian war bloggers erupted in disbelief. How did a lone Ukrainian jet bypass Russia's most advanced air defenses and annihilate a fortified base? The answer was buried in layers of Ukrainian improvisation, Western data, battlefield engineering, and a doctrine that prioritized brains over brute force. This wasn't just a strike, it was a message, a declaration. The era of Ukrainian retaliation had entered a new phase. Not only could they defend their skies, they could now strike with terrifying precision, anywhere, anytime. As the sun rose higher over eastern Ukraine, only one truth remained. A new chapter in the war had been written not by generals in boardrooms, but by a lone pilot with steel nerves, an untested weapon, and a nation's fury
from the
riding on his
collapsed
wings.
roof of the Russian 132nd Airborne Command Base in occupied Luhansk. Intelligence operatives in Kyiv stared at live thermal overlays with expressions caught somewhere between awe and disbelief. Their screens glowed with infrared signatures showing no significant movement in the blast zone, no counteroffensive mobilizations, no coordinated radio frequency handoffs. In military terms, the target had gone dark. Not jammed, not silent, but obliterated. The enemy's communications hub had simply ceased to exist. Back at the launch site, the command trailer remained deathly quiet as a young female technician, no older than 24, took her headset off and whispered, "Hit confirmed." No one cheered. There was no applause. They had just struck the nerve center of one of Russia's most fortified regional bases with a homemade weapon launched from a fighter twice its own age, using guidance systems that had been patched together from 3 different NATO software kits and a Ukrainian drone app rewritten by a guy who once coded cryptocurrency bots for underground gambling rings. It didn't feel real. It felt like something out of a novel, except it wasn't fiction. It was war, and this was a new chapter. Inside the emergency bunker beneath the ruined Russian base, Colonel Artyom Lukyanov was half-conscious, pinned beneath a concrete support beam that had collapsed during the initial blast. Blood trickled from a gash above his eye. His ears rang with the kind of high-pitched tone that always followed close proximity detonations. Around him, the bunker was lit only by emergency LEDs and the occasional flicker of dying monitors. Dust clung to the air like ash after a forest fire. One of his aides was slumped forward across the console, unmoving. Lukyanov reached for his handset only to find the antenna bent, the casing cracked. He muttered a curse in a rasping voice, rolled onto his side, and began crawling toward the auxiliary comms cabinet. If the strike had succeeded the way it appeared to, then they had just lost not only regional command of airborne operations, but likely every line of encrypted contact between Rostov and the northern Donetsk theater. If the Ukrainians could do this once, they could do it again. And if they could do it again, nothing in range of the border was safe. Meanwhile, the Volya development lab, known to its creators as Garage 45, was already preparing its next set of targeting packages. Hidden beneath an old textile warehouse outside Dnipro, the team operated with minimal power, irregular internet access, and surveillance evasion tactics so advanced that not even half of Ukraine's own Ministry of Defense knew where they were located. Most of them weren't even officially part of the military. There were software devs, machine learning researchers, former radar techs, and a 62-year-old retired electrical engineer named Ivan, who once helped build the Soviet Union's own cruise missile guidance systems in the 1980s. Now he spent his days soldering new circuit bridges using stripped-down components from commercial drones, emergency radios, and busted microwave ovens. It was Ivan who had first proposed using agricultural drone terrain scanning software to build a dynamic terrain contour matching protocol for the Volya's final approach sequence. He had modeled it using Python scripts on a laptop so old it had Windows Vista stickers, and yet it worked.
At 0644, while the second Volya strike's aftershock still rolled through the Russian logistics network like a subterranean tremor. Ukrainian cyber units went live with Phase 3 of a coordinated attack cycle planned for over 5 months. The moment Russian military radio and data traffic switched to emergency fallback channels, older encrypted lines with known vulnerabilities, teams from Ukraine's SIGINT division and allied NATO cyber assets began injecting custom-coded packet floods through satellite backdoor entry points. These weren't just denial-of-service attacks. They were surgical, worm-based code exploits specifically designed to breach the emergency override channels used by Russian motor rifle regiments in Luhansk, Donetsk, and Belgorod. The objective was simple: blind them, confuse their command hierarchy, make every incoming order seem compromised. Within 7 minutes of the Volya 2 impact, at precisely 06:44:13, the 1st Russian Signals Battalion sent up an internal warning: voice pattern mismatch. Do not comply until chain of command verification. That sentence would echo through Russian field comms like a cold breath down a soldier's spine. No one knew what was real. In the sky over Dnipro, Vesper's Su-27 skimmed back toward home base with barely 1,200 kilograms of fuel remaining. His RWR, radar warning receiver, was blank, his chaff pods half depleted. The second missile strike had drawn attention. Russian AWACS units had scrambled out of Voronezh just 5 minutes after the depot hit. They were scanning, reaching, hunting, but they didn't know what to look for. A new class of weapon, an unpredictable flight path, and pilots who didn't fly the old way. The entire Ukrainian offensive pattern had changed. No more squadrons in formation, no more predictive altitude climbs, no more broadcast comms. Each sortie was now an island, operating autonomously, coordinated only by brief, encrypted bursts transmitted via line-of-sight relay drones. On the ground, Ukrainian technicians in Garage 45 were preparing a third Volya unit, this one destined for an aerial target relay. Codenamed Ghost Link, the relay involved a converted civilian Cessna 172 with its entire cabin gutted and replaced with signal amplification gear. It flew at low altitudes, mimicking agricultural drones, moving in elliptical patterns over safe zones, beaming updated telemetry to inbound missiles like a flying Wi-Fi repeater. The Cessna pilot, a 32-year-old former aeronautics student, had been recruited after uploading an anonymous YouTube video showing how to spoof Russian GPS signals using off-the-shelf Arduino boards and a few lines of Python. Now he wore a Ukrainian Air Force patch and flew missions that would have terrified combat pilots from any other country. At 07:03, Ghostlink took off under cloud cover and climbed to 1,100 feet, just above the ground clutter of industrial Kryvyi Rih. The Volya 3 missile, already loaded onto a MiG-29 at a secret strip north of Zaporizhia, would rely on Ghostlink to feed mid-course correction data past the Dnipro River. The missile's target? A mobile command and control post operating out of a railway hub in Rovenki. Intelligence had confirmed the presence of 5 Russian GRU cyber warfare officers and 2 high-value planners responsible for electronic jamming in southern Ukraine. They were staging systems meant to disrupt upcoming Ukrainian armor movements near Orikhiv. That jamming system had already downed 4 reconnaissance drones and crippled multiple armored battalion communications. It had to go. At 07:17, the MiG-29, painted in low-contrast matte gray and stripped of everything not essential to speed or power, blasted down its short runway, vaulted into the sky, and banked hard southeast. The pilot, Frost, flew with the demeanor of someone who didn't expect to return, not because he was suicidal, but because he had long accepted that heroism in this war didn't come with applause or medals. It came with silence, blurry footage, and a quiet funeral if you were lucky. His onboard systems had no HUD, no heads-up artificial horizon. He flew by instinct, by the feel of the stick, and the rumble of altitude vibration. The missile slung beneath his fuselage had a fresh guidance module and a deep learning AI protocol hard-coded in by a 19-year-old Kyiv programmer working out of a train station coffee shop during missile raids. That protocol was about to be tested for the first time in combat. Frost reached the release window at 07:26. He had 4 seconds of radar exposure. Just 4. He pulled vertical for less than 2, saw his RWR light up like a bonfire, and dropped the missile clean. It plummeted, then surged forward under rocket impulse, curving into its glide vector at precisely 700 kilometers per hour. As Frost disappeared westward at treetop height, the Volya missile rightward banked, adjusting for wind pressure, fed real-time adjustments by Ghostlink circling just outside Nikopol airspace. The missile danced through valleys and over riverbeds like a dragonfly with vengeance in its veins. Meanwhile, at the Ravenki rail hub, Russian operators were setting up antenna arrays on 3 mobile trucks. One vehicle had its bay doors open, revealing racks of encrypted hardware glowing with static-loaded displays. Inside the central truck, Major Vyacheslav Grigoriev of the GRU was reviewing a satellite relay diagnostic when the ground beneath him shook. 2 seconds later, a blinding flash erupted from the access hatch. The Volya missile, approaching at a 12-degree descent vector, impacted just behind the first command truck. The explosion ripped through all 3 vehicles, igniting fuel tanks and vaporizing anyone within 25-meter radius. The targeting AI had chosen the moment with algorithmic perfection, when all the key targets were within blast radius and their jammer systems had just begun to power up. No countermeasures, no response, just silence, broken by the low groan of twisted metal and the shrill shriek of emergency sirens. By 0732, Ukrainian Air Command confirmed that Volya 3 had hit its mark. Radio chatter in the sector dropped 80%. Satellite scans showed dozens of Russian soldiers scattering across the railway yard in confusion. Half their systems were offline. Back in Garage 45, Ivan leaned back in his chair and said nothing. He simply lit a cigarette, took a deep drag, and stared at the telemetry readout as if watching a symphony unfold. The kid who programmed the AI, whose name had never been officially recorded, watched from a laptop in a Kyiv subway station, tears running down his face. He whispered, "It worked," to no one in particular. Elsewhere in Ukraine, word was spreading. The Volya strike campaign had become a legend in under 3 hours. Telegram channels buzzed with speculations, fake videos, unverified audio clips, and endless reposts of thermal satellite captures. Russian influencers were stunned into silence. No one knew what to say. A war that had, for months, seemed mired in attrition and trench warfare stagnation, had just taken a quantum leap into another dimension, one where a country fighting for its life had engineered its way out of desperation. At 0740, Russia initiated an emergency high-priority satellite scan of southern Ukraine trying to locate the origin sites of the Volya missiles. They found nothing. No large-scale installations, no fixed radar arrays, no bases large enough to suggest new missile programs. What they didn't understand is that they weren't looking for missile silos. They were looking for garages, basements, parked cars wired with antennas, rented apartments with fiber optic spools tucked behind drywall. Ukraine had turned the very idea of a weapons program inside out. The weapons weren't built by governments. They were engineered by communities. As dawn bled into full morning, and the sun cast long shadows across the flattened ruins of the Russian command post, a silence settled across the front. Not the quiet of peace, the quiet of recalibration, of fear. Russian commanders began issuing relocation orders. High-value units were told to scatter. Regional bases were to reduce their radio emissions by 40%. Orders were printed on paper again. Couriers on motorcycles were dispatched to deliver maps. Even the FSB began to investigate internal leaks, believing wrongly that the precision strikes had come from moles or spies. They didn't realize that the targeting data had come from harvested phone metadata, AI-analyzed drone footage, and a network of citizens who tagged Russian movements on encrypted apps like they were raiding restaurant deliveries. At 0759, the final image of the morning was captured by a Polish military satellite tasked with routine weather monitoring. It was a wide-angle shot, centered over Ravenki. In the frame, a single crater, surrounded by the skeletal frames of 3 command trucks, their satellite dishes bent at unnatural angles. No movement, no survivors visible, just a void where a nerve center had once been.